and he died suddenly, just like that.
The Rock just dropped a bombshell, and it's not the kind of tribute fans were bracing for. In the wake of Hulk Hogan's death, he's finally opening up about why so many wrestlers quietly despise the man behind the mustache. From shattered trust to careers left in ruins, this is the raw truth behind why Hogan's legacy is now unraveling. The betrayal that shook the wrestling world forever. On July 24th, 2025, the industry said goodbye to Hulk Hogan, lost to cardiac arrest at the age of 71. But instead of the kind of universal grief you'd expect for such an icon, what followed was something far more complicated and revealing. While many fans mourned the loss of their childhood hero, others, especially the wrestlers who really knew him, felt something entirely different. The Rock's tribute, though respectful on the surface, carried quiet undertones, echoes of a darker truth about the man who wore the mask of Hulkamania. But to understand why Hogan inspired so much resentment, we have to rewind to 1986, to a moment that would reshape the soul of professional wrestling and ignite decades of bitterness. Picture this. It's early 1986, right before Wrestlemania 2, and the wrestling world is standing at a crossroads. Wrestlers are labeled as independent contractors. No health insurance, no retirement plans, no shield from the brutal grind that would slowly break their bodies, and sometimes even take their lives too soon. Grinding through 350 days a year on the road, these performers are wrecking their bodies with no net, no union, no promise of care when age or injury ends it all. And then came Jesse the Body Ventura, a man who had seen real power in unity, who understood the strength of standing together. Ventura wasn't just a wrestler. He was a visionary who glimpsed a better future, one where wrestlers fought not just in the ring, but for their rights.
We were all in a dressing room, and there was nobody from the office. I waited, and I got up on a chair, and I told everybody, now is our time to unionize. I said, all the publicity's gone out on Wrestlemania. I said, if we refuse to wrestle, unless union negotiators are brought in, it's federal law. They have to be brought in. It's the law. And I said, and then if we can get the Charlotte guys to join us, we can freeze them, freeze Vince, and force them to do collective bargaining, and we can finally get a union. And I gave my impassioned speech.
But Ventura knew that for this plan to work, he needed the backing of the one man who could actually move mountains inside the company. He needed Hulk Hogan. At that moment in time, Hogan wasn't just the biggest name. They had built the entire wrestling boom around him. He wasn't a star. He was the star. The one man who could make or break a career with a quiet word in Vince McMahon's ear. If Hogan stood with them, it could have changed everything, for every wrestler in the business. But what happened next still echoes like a gut punch through wrestling history. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was one of the most soul-crushing, career-shattering betrayals the sport had ever seen. And Jesse Ventura has never forgotten it, never forgiven it, because instead of standing with his brothers, instead of using his unmatched power to make things better, Hogan walked straight into Vince McMahon's office. And he gave it all up, every detail of the union plan, every name, every conversation. He ratted out the entire movement, and what followed was swift and brutal.
Day I go home, my phone rings, it's Vince. The union, da-da-da. I said, Vince, I fought him. I said, Vince, I'm not talking about just fighting you and that. I said, right now, this was 1980s. I said, right now I pay $5,000 a year for health care for my family. If we had a union, I might only have to pay $1,250. Because there's strength in number.
McMahon confronted Ventura the very next day, cutting him loose not long after. And with that, the union dream was dead before it ever had a chance to live. But here's the twist. No one knew the full truth at the time. This betrayal, it wouldn't come to light until years later.
I said no. My attorney said, well, then how did you know? With no hesitation. Vince answered, Hulk Hogan told me. Now he's under sworn deposition here. He's under sworn deposition to tell the truth.
Yeah.
There was no hesitation. Hulk Hogan told me. And then Vince also admitted it to Larry King. when he was on Larry King, because Larry King brought it up. Is it true that Hulk Hogan's the one that ratted Jesse Ventura when he tried to unionize wrestling? And
Imagine the betrayal Ventura must have felt, finding out that the very man he once called a friend was the one who quietly destroyed the union from within. But here's where things spiral even further, dragging Hogan's legacy into even darker territory. In the 2024 Netflix docuseries Mr. McMahon, Hogan himself confirmed it all. He admitted to tipping off the company, claiming he did it to protect both the business and his own spot at the top. He insisted a union might have stalled the industry's momentum. But to his critics, that sounded like pure self-preservation. While Hogan raked in millions from merchandise deals and pay-per-view bonuses, his fellow wrestlers were scraping by, struggling with medical bills and uncertain futures. And on Chris Van Vliet's podcast in 2024, Ventura didn't hold back. He dismissed Hogan's reasoning as pathetic and flat out accused him of lying just to avoid being branded a stooge. Similarly, on the Bill Simmons podcast in 2024, Ventura made it clear Hogan sold them out for nothing but personal gain. These aren't old wounds that time has healed. This is fresh, burning anger from a man who's had decades to sit with the reality that one man's selfish move reshaped an entire industry. And the weight of that betrayal, it's impossible to overstate. That moment set a precedent, one that would delay unionization in wrestling for generations. Even now, WWE wrestlers remain classified as independent contractors, stripped of full union rights, and forced to endure consequences like alarming injury rates, no pensions, and relentless schedules. Think of all the legends we've lost over the years. Owen Hart, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, and ask yourself, how different would their stories be if they had true healthcare, real protections, and someone fighting for them behind the curtain? Ventura believes those lives, those endings, might have looked very different. But because of Hogan's betrayal back in 1986, wrestlers have been trapped in a system that values profit far above their pain, their health, or their lives.
All of a sudden, The Rock comes out, gets in the middle of the ring, challenges me to Wrestlemania. I go to shake his hand, he won't let my hand go. He pulls me back in. And right where face to face, he rock bottoms me, and dumps me in the middle of the ring on the back.
Public backlash has only intensified, especially after 2024, as social media users began calling Hogan exactly what he was, a union buster. Many started connecting the dots, linking his actions to a much wider pattern of labor exploitation across the entertainment industry. In a 2025 Instagram post, one user put it bluntly, Hogan's betrayal is part of the reason so many wrestlers die young. This is an exaggeration. This is truth finally being acknowledged. Because Hogan's choice to chase wealth and protect his throne at the expense of unity has had tragic, even deadly consequences. But here's the thing, the union busting, it was only the beginning. What you're about to see in the next chapters of this series is a much deeper pattern, one where Hogan's self-serving behavior becomes the through line in a career filled with casualties, where his unchecked influence destroyed rising stars before they had a chance, and where his ego, his deceit, his hunger for control built a toxic backstage culture that wrestlers are still trying to survive. The Rock's recent confessions, stacked on top of years of accounts from those who knew Hogan behind the curtain, reveal a man who would stop at nothing, sacrifice anyone, to protect his spot at the top. This isn't envy. It's not rivalry. It's a cold, calculated history of betrayal that has rippled across generations. This is the politics of destruction, the way Hogan buried careers. So let's begin by pulling back the curtain and examining the grip Hulk Hogan had on the industry. Because his backstage power, it wasn't just strong, it was unmatched. Whispers of him rewriting scripts, shutting down storylines, and making sure he stayed center stage. They weren't just rumors. Starting with his close bond with Vince McMahon, Hogan gained enormous backstage influence, enough to sway major booking decisions. But it was in WCW where that power became something far more dangerous, because during his run there, Hogan's backstage politics reached their most destructive peak. His reputation as the ultimate puppet master didn't come out of nowhere. He understood the game, how to work it, bend it, and twist it in his favor, masterfully promoting himself while pushing others aside. In the WCW of the 1990s, Hogan's influence hit a new level, thanks to one key detail, a creative control clause written right into his contract. It allowed him to veto or approve match outcomes, essentially putting him above the bookers, above the talent, above everything. And that clause, it became his most dangerous weapon. He used it to shield his image, protect his brand, and frustrate anyone who tried to challenge him. And then came the moment that exposed it all. A single event that became the clearest example of just how far Hogan's ego could reach. Starrcade 1997, to this day, stands as perhaps the most heartbreaking display of Hogan's backstage sabotage, because this was supposed to be Sting's night, a moment the entire wrestling world had waited for. The final payoff of a year-long arc, where Sting, the silent guardian cloaked in mystery, would finally rise up, defeat the villainous Hollywood Hogan, and return WCW to the heroes. It had the weight, it had the audience, it had the makings of history. But what happened next changed everything instead. Hogan allegedly manipulated the finish against Sting, twisting what should have been a clean, powerful loss into a confusing mess. Rather than doing the right thing, he turned it into a fast count controversy with a forced restart, watering down Sting's moment completely. It should have been a defining victory, but thanks to Hogan's interference, the ending felt hollow, leaving fans confused, disappointed, and robbed of the payoff they'd been promised. But this wasn't just about a single match. Hogan's choices fed the chaos already boiling inside WCW. He doubled down on prioritizing his NWO faction, the New World Order, a storyline that soaked up screen time, but quietly pushed other talent to the margins. Originally, the NWO was built as a temporary storyline tool, designed to eventually help WCW's heroes rise. But under Hogan's control, it mutated into something else entirely. A vanity project. A vehicle for ego, not storytelling. And in the process, it choked out other narratives, prevented fresh stars from rising, and tilted WCW's balance in a way that would eventually backfire. But Hogan's trail of political destruction, it didn't end with WCW.
Well, Monster, before you go to Toronto, I need you down in Miami tomorrow. I said, Miami? Why Miami? Well, The Rock wants to rehearse the matches. Rehearse what? I've never rehearsed anything in my life. What are you talking about? Well, we just want to make sure.
When he returned to WWE in the 2000s, the same patterns crept back in. By 2005, the backstage tension had reached a boiling point. Creative clashes, disputes over pay. And just like that, Hogan was gone again. Jim Ross would later point to political games behind the scenes as the real reason for his exit. Even in the twilight of his career, Hogan couldn't resist, still trying to shape outcomes, still pulling strings to keep himself front and center. Then came TNA. Starting in 2010, Hogan and Eric Bischoff took the reins, and almost overnight, the tone shifted. What had once been a haven for innovative wrestling suddenly leaned hard into flashy, overproduced entertainment. Fans and critics alike felt it. Ratings fell, the roster grew frustrated, and the product lost the very identity that had made it special. And once again, Hogan's fingerprints were all over the downfall. Another promotion that had been gaining momentum derailed after his arrival. But now, we need to talk about something even deeper, the behavior that may have caused the most long-term damage of all. Hogan's unwavering, systematic refusal to lose matches clean, especially when those losses could have made a real difference for rising stars who desperately needed that victory. Putting someone over by losing to them is how you build new stars. It's how you pass the torch and create the next wave of main event icons. But Hogan, he couldn't let go. Driven by the obsession to protect his invincible image, he consistently resisted, claiming that losing would damage his drawing power. And the result? A long list of wrestling legends, all denied the moment that could have launched them higher. One name in particular shines through that list, Bret Hart. And what happened to him in 1993 is the clearest window into Hogan's self-interest. Hart was ready. He was the future. But Hogan didn't see it that way. He flat out refused to drop the WWF title to Hart at SummerSlam, saying Hart wasn't enough of a box office draw. So instead, Hogan lost it to Yokozuna, and only then did Hart win it. But the timing was off. The moment had passed, and Hart's rise was needlessly delayed. To this day, he believes it was deliberate, that Hogan sabotaged his career to keep the spotlight to himself. And the impact? Massive. Because Bret Hart wasn't just another contender. He was one of the most technically gifted wrestlers of his generation.
Really hadn't seen The Rock since I threw my headband out and he caught it when he was a kid, you know.
That's cool.
A man who could have carried the company through the delicate transition in the early 1990s. But Hogan's refusal to pass the torch cleanly meant Hart's rise was stalled, tangled in politics, and fans were robbed of what could have been a truly legendary run. And remember Starrcade 1997? That moment we revisited with Sting? It didn't just ruin his defining moment. It left the audience visibly upset. Fans booed the outcome, and you have to imagine what it felt like to be Sting. You've spent a full year crafting this journey, building the story to perfection, and when the payoff finally comes, your opponent's political games turn your biggest triumph into chaos. And Hogan didn't stop there. In 2005, his unwillingness to do a clean job for Shawn Michaels led to one of the most bizarre, unprofessional moments in wrestling history. Hogan had agreed to a series of matches, but then he pulled back. Suddenly, it would only be one match. One win for Hogan. No rematch. No back and forth. And Michaels, in protest, sold Hogan's moves like a cartoon character, overselling everything in a mockery of the whole thing. The result? A cringeworthy spectacle that didn't just feel awkward. It exposed Hogan's ego and his ongoing refusal to help build up the next generation. Even in his match with The Rock at WrestleMania 18, a bout often hailed as one of the greatest matches of all time, there were doubts behind the curtain. Because at first, there were real concerns about whether Hogan would actually go along with the plan, whether he'd truly be willing to do business. The fact that WWE felt the need to have Hogan rehearse the match in Miami speaks volumes about their concerns, about whether he'd actually go through with the finish they had planned. Even The Rock's own father urged his son to defer, to respect Hogan's experience, and likely, his political preferences. But Hogan's grip wasn't just limited to influence. It cost rising stars everything. Randy Orton's run as a top heel was gaining momentum, until SummerSlam 2006. Hogan refused to lose cleanly, defeating Orton with his usual moves. And just like that, a future main eventer had his credibility shaken, at a critical moment in his rise. And then there was Bash at the Beach 2000, perhaps the most blatant example of Hogan refusing to take a loss. In WCW, he invoked his creative control clause to dodge dropping the title to Jeff Jarrett, walking out and triggering one of the most infamous shoot promos in wrestling history. Vince Russo tore into Hogan on live TV, calling him out by name. The moment didn't just shatter a storyline, it helped accelerate WCW's collapse. Hogan sued for defamation, but the fact that he later settled suggests Russo's words hit close to the truth. And maybe the most telling sign of Hogan's career-killing behavior was how far beyond match outcomes it extended. Behind the scenes, Hogan allegedly downplayed the Ultimate Warrior's popularity to Vince McMahon, a move that many believe led to Warrior's firings in the 1990s, despite overwhelming fan support. The Ultimate Warrior wasn't just another act. He was one of the most electrifying performers in wrestling history. But Hogan's quiet manipulation ensured Warrior's big moments were short-lived, and his comebacks, always messy Billy Kidman and others in WCW suffered under Hogan's reign, with Hogan reportedly shutting down pushes from mid-carders like Kidman, even mocking him on air by calling him not credible. It was a public burial, one that crushed momentum and destroyed credibility. And this wasn't just about the main event scene. Hogan was actively blocking mid-card talent from rising, creating a backstage culture where only his handpicked few were allowed to thrive. But the damage didn't stop at individual careers. The broader consequences of Hogan's political games were massive. His dominance within the NWO storyline cast a shadow across the entire WCW roster, contributing heavily to the company's downfall. What was meant to be a temporary storyline to elevate WCW's heroes, Hogan twisted into a monument to himself. Other narratives were suffocated. New stars never got the spotlight. And then came TNA. When Hogan arrived in 2010, the same script unfolded. Formats shifted, veterans were prioritized, and young talent got pushed aside. Ratings dropped. The company teetered on collapse. History repeated itself, another promotion unraveling under Hogan's influence. And for the young, promising wrestlers caught in the fallout, the damage wasn't just professional. The emotional toll of being blocked, buried, or overlooked because of Hogan's backstage politics is something that can't be overstated. Bret Hart has said it flat out. Hogan ruined his career by refusing to elevate him properly. And these aren't minor setbacks. These were career-altering, dream-crushing moments. Even in reflecting on their legendary WrestleMania 18 showdown, Hogan couldn't help but center himself. He openly admitted to ignoring The Rock's input, calling the match his way, like he always did, even when standing across from someone he respected. Collaboration was never truly on the table, because for Hogan, it was never really about us. It was always about me. The wrestling world's reaction to Hogan's death was not unified grief, but a fractured reckoning. While WWE rolled out glossy tributes, black fans and wrestlers, like DL Hughley and Roland Martin, refused to let the racism be buried with him. X-posts flooded the timeline with reminders. Hulk Hogan, the character, may have inspired millions, but Terry Bolley, the man, betrayed them. One viral comment read, "He died a racist, a union buster." That's who he was. Even influencer Joey Swole, after posting a tribute, faced such a wave of backlash, he quietly stepped away from the internet altogether. But perhaps the most devastating indictment came from within Hogan's own family. His daughter, Brooke Hogan, skipped his funeral, turned down her inheritance, and told the world exactly why, because he disrespected her for dating a black man. That's not just a racist ideology. That's a father's love, poisoned by hate. And that leaves us with the impossible question. How do you remember Hulk Hogan? Do you celebrate the man who took wrestling global, who made millions believe in larger-than-life heroes? Or do you remember the man who silenced unions, buried careers, betrayed his fans, and, in the end, couldn't even keep the love of his own child? In 2025, as headlines revisited every skeleton in his closet, outlets like Slate didn't mince words. Everybody hated Hulk Hogan, for good reason. And Jesse Ventura, in a viral YouTube clip, he didn't need metaphors. He was a union buster. He placated to the bosses. That's his legacy. This is the truth behind the